Welcome to the English class. This is our third online lesson, and this is a live platform. So that means the Q&A is available on the live chat there on YouTube. If you get the link, please share it to somebody that you think might be interested in this. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into this lesson. Today's lesson is a special lesson. As we announced last week, we're going to be looking at literature, English literature, specifically Christian English literature. And today we're going to be reading from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Our plan is to read several chapters from this book. We may not read all of it, but we want to explore it. Not only to pick up new vocabulary, to get more fluid in how we read English as I read it together with you, but also to look at themes within the Chronicles of Narnia, within this book in particular. And yeah, we're very excited to start this new lesson format. The team here is looking at how we can expand this program and see what new ways we can do to teach English, to learn English, and ultimately learn about God and see His message throughout the English language as it has been in all languages. So just to review from last week, we did a lesson last week that was kind of helping to prep us to look at fiction novels, and we talked about talking about the past. And there are 4 basic ways to look at the past and in English, and as you see in the screen, there's the present perfect, the past perfect, the simple past, and the past continuous. If you want to learn about these, I highly encourage you to look at last week's video. There you'll find a slideshow, same thing like this, but with a slideshow, and we go through each of these and look at examples and whatnot. And of course, if you are looking for more resources, reach out to me, reach out to the church. We'll try and help you out. I do phone call lessons, private tutoring at a reasonable arrangement. If you just reach out to me, I'll try and get back to you for free. It's I do this as a volunteering with the church, so don't worry about charge. At a reasonable cost. I won't do everything under the sun, so bear with us. So real quickly, just so that if you were here for last week's lesson, just to recap what they are briefly, the present perfect is when you have the helping verb have and to have and a past preterite. So an example: I have lived in San Jose for so many years, right? So it's something that started in the past and continues up until the present, right? I could also use it to talk about general concepts when the time is ambiguous. So if I ask, have you ever read the Chronicles of Narnia, right? So if I ask you, have you ever read this book, right? So have you ever read this book? You could say, yes, I have read this book. So you can see the word read, not like the color red. Be careful, it's spelled differently. R-E-D would be the color. R-E-A-D would be the past preterite for the word read, right? So I have read this book. Okay, so I hope that refreshes your memory on the present perfect. The past perfect, very easy transitioning from the last one. To go from present perfect to past perfect, they're very similar, except the helping verb, to have, is now in the past, and that will be had. And that will be the same for every pronoun. So I had, you had, he had, they had. In literature, this one is very common. Now, how does the context change? Well, again, you're just going from the present perfect to the past perfect. So whereas the present perfect is anything that happened, started in the past, but continues unto the present, or the time is ambiguous, up unto the present. The past perfect has an ambiguous end time, but that's definitely in the past. And if that still seems kind of confusing, don't worry. We'll look at examples. We're going to read a novel, and there's going to be plenty of examples, so you'll get to see it in action. All right. And thirdly, the simple past. This is very simple. It's just the subject plus the verb in the past tense. So I am, I was, right? And this can be used to describe things throughout books and literature, etc. So that one is fairly simple. Again, we're going to see these throughout the chapter that we're reading today. So just hold on if you still have some questions about that. Again, we do have our technical team here. We're monitoring the live chat. So if you do have questions about these, feel free to ask. And we'll try and get back to your question. The past continuous is, if you remember the present continuous, we looked at this 3 weeks ago. This is when you have the helping verb, to be, right, plus the gerund verb. An example, you could say, I am drinking water. Drinking comes from the word to drink, and now it's the gerund, so it's a continuous action, right? I am drinking. Now let's put that in the past. The past continuous is going to be, if you use that same thing, I was drinking. Now this form, especially when you're telling a story, whether it be in a formal book or just out in the streets, and you're saying, oh, this happened. If you want to set the scene, you want to describe what was happening around the primary action of the sentence or story that you're telling, you may want to use the past continuous, because the past continuous is like you're describing the ambiance or the setting. So it was raining that night, right? So if I'm telling a story of what happened last night, it's like, oh yeah, last night I went to the store. It was raining, it was cold, etc. So you can see I mix the simple past with the past continuous. So those are things you can look at. If you want to see where we got the text for today's book, we have it linked in the resource. I don't know if it's linked in the description yet, but we will put it there. And also on the screen, you see that link. That link will take you to a free version of the book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So I hope that that little review we had helped you out. Let's go in and dig right into it. And start with Chapter 1 of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Lucy looks into the wardrobe. Quick note, right before we jump right into it, you'll notice I put in blue and bold some of the past tense verbs. Those are the ones I want you to look at. So I may periodically stop and explain that. Also, another thing I may explain are some more antiquated or English from England, British expressions that C.S. Lewis, the author, uses, just so you learn some new foreign phrases or get some clarification. All right, are you ready? How's the, let's just check in with our live stream. Is it good? Questions? No? How many viewers? Awesome! I just heard that we have almost 10. Is that correct? Yes, and that's great for our channel. I'm sure in the future we'll look back and say, 10, we have 10,000 now. But right now we're very excited. So let's go ahead and jump right into this book. Feel free to read on the screen with us. Again, you could also go to that resource. Quick note about that resource is that really cool about this resource is that it has the audio, 2 audio bars. So you can click and then somebody will read it, a pre-recorded voice will read it to you. In addition, the second bar for audio is slow. So you can do slow English or normal English, like speed-wise. That is also very helpful if you want to read it again. So I do encourage you to go back, go to that resource, read it on your own, and hopefully you enjoy the story. So let's go ahead and start. All right, so Chapter 1. Once there were 3 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. They were sent to the house of an old professor who lived in the heart of the country, 10 miles from the nearest railway station and 2 miles from the nearest post office. He had no wife, and he lived in a very large house with a housekeeper called Mrs. Macready and 3 servants. Their names were Ivy, Margaret, and Betty, but they do not come into the story very much. He himself was a very old man, with shaggy white hair, which grew over most of his face, as well as on his head, and they liked him almost at once. But on the first evening, when he came out to meet them at the door, he was so odd-looking that Lucy, who was the youngest, was a little afraid of him, and Edmund, who was the next youngest, wanted to laugh and had to keep on pretending he was blowing his nose to hide it. As soon as they had said good night to the professor and gone upstairs on the first night, the boys came into the girls' room and they all talked it over. We've fallen. Now, you know, just quick note, there's apostrophe there, right? So we could break that down to we have fallen. Again, that's the past present, right? We have fallen on our feet, and no mistake, said Peter. Another note, that would be like an expression, right? So he's not saying literally, right? He's saying we've fallen on our feet, and no mistake. And if you look at the context, he follows that up with, this is going to be perfectly splendid. So we've fallen on our feet is a good thing, right? So basically, this is a good place to be. So let's read that again. We've fallen on our feet and no mistake, said Peter. This is going to be perfectly splendid. That old chap will let us do anything we like. And chap is a English way. I don't know if they still say this commonly in England, but chap is in a way of saying man or dude, like that. It's just an older way of saying dude, basically. Slang of that age. This is written in the 40s, so just to give you an idea. I think he's an old dear, said Susan. Oh, come off it, said Edmund. And that is another expression right there, right? So, oh, come off it. Come off it is another older expression, basically saying come off it is like stop it, right? Stop doing what you're doing in another way. In Spanish, we can say deja de hacer eso, right? Dejar de hacer is basically what come off it means. In this case, it's her attitude he's referring to, and we'll see that in a second. He's saying stop behaving that way. Don't sound like that. You know, you're trying to sound a way that you're not. We'll see that in the context, but oh, come off it. Basic translation as an expression would be stop it, right? Pretty simple. All right, so said Edmund, who was tired and pretending not to be tired, which always made him bad-tempered. Don't go on talking like that. So again, reinforcing come off it, right? Oh, come off it. Don't go on talking like that. Like what? Said Susan. And anyway, it's time you were in bed. Trying to talk like mother, said Edmund. And who are you to say when I'm going to... And who are you to say when I'm to go to bed? Go to bed yourself. Hadn't we all better go to bed? Said Lucy. There's sure to be a row if we're heard talking here. And that right there, a row is an English expression. I think I don't know if it's particular to Yorkshire dialect, but definitely in England you'll hear people say a row. And in America, a row is just a row, like a row of chairs or something like that. Over across the pond in the United Kingdom, you'll hear people say a row for like, it's hard to kind of explain, but there's sure to be a row if we are heard talking. So basically people will become upset, right? They won't be happy if they're like that. They're going to be these kids are going to be in trouble, right? There's going to be a row. There's going to the adults are going to get upset, is what she's expressing here. So repeating that again. There's sure to be a row if we're heard talking here. Hadn't we all better go to bed? Said Lucy. Oh, sorry, typo. There's an error there. All right, so that's what Lucy just said. There's sure to be a row if we're heard talking here. No, there won't, said Peter. I tell you, this is the sort of house where no one's going to mind what we do. Anyway, they won't hear us. It's about 10 minutes' walk from here down to that dining room, and any amount of stairs and passages in between. What's that noise? Said Lucy suddenly. It was a far larger house than she had ever been in before, and the thought of all those long passages and rows of doors leading into empty rooms was beginning to make her feel a little creepy. So you see here the use of the word row in its more common usage and the way we use it here in America and England, right? So row, but in England, row has different meanings, right? So a row could be like an upsetness in the air, right? So just use the same word used in a different way. So, and rows of doors leading into empty rooms was beginning to make her feel a little creepy. "It's only a bird, silly," said Edmund. "It's an owl," said Peter. "This is going to be a wonderful place for birds. I shall go to bed now." And you might remember that shall is another way of saying will. They mean exactly the same thing. They don't change the tense. It's the same exact future tense. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Marcus. All right. I should have got this first, huh? Okay. All right, so if you're back with us, let's go and continue. I say, let's go and explore tomorrow. You might find anything in a place like this. Did you see those mountains as we came along? And the woods? There might be eagles. There might be stags. There'll be hawks. Badgers, said Lucy. Foxes, said Edmund. Rabbits, said Susan. But when next morning came, there was a steady rain falling, so thick that when you looked out of the window, you could see neither the mountains, nor the woods, nor even the stream in the garden. Of course it would be raining, said Edmund. They had just finished their breakfast with the professor, and were upstairs in the room he had set apart for them. A long, low room with 2 windows looking out in one direction and 2 in another. Do stop grumbling, Ed, said Susan. 10 to 1 it'll clear up in an hour or so. And in the meantime, we're pretty well off. There's a wireless and lots of books. I believe this is actually a reference to a radio, a wireless. It would be a 40s terminology, right? So again, keep in mind some of this terminology is antiquated, it's old, but it's still quite enjoyable and good to learn. So just keep that in mind. Not for me, said Peter. I'm going to explore in the house. Everyone agreed to this, and that was how the adventures began. It was the sort of house that you never seemed to come to the end of, and it was full of unexpected places. The next few doors they tried led only into spare bedrooms, as everyone had expected that they would. But soon they came to a very long room full of pictures, and there they found a suit of armor. And after that was a room all hung with green, with a harp in one corner, and then came 3 steps down and 5 steps up, and then a kind of little upstairs hall and a door that led out onto a balcony, and then a whole series of rooms that led into each other and were lined with books, most of them very old books, and some bigger than a Bible in a church. And shortly after that, they looked into a room that was quite empty except for one big wardrobe, the sort that has a looking-glass in the door. There was nothing else in the room at all except a dead blue bottle on the window-sill. Nothing here, said Peter, and they all trooped out again, all except Lucy. She stayed behind because she thought it would be worthwhile trying the door of the wardrobe, even though she felt almost sure that it would be locked. To her surprise, it opened quite easily, and 2 mothballs dropped out. Looking into the inside, she saw several coats hanging up, mostly long fur coats. There was nothing Lucy liked so much as the smell and feel of fur. She immediately stepped into the wardrobe and got in among the coats and rubbed her face against them, leaving the door open, of course, because she knew that it is very foolish to shut oneself into any wardrobe. Soon she went further in and found that there was a second row of coats hanging up behind the first one. It was almost quite dark in there, and she kept her arms stretched out in front of her so as not to bump her face into the back of the wardrobe. She took a step further in, then 2 or 3 steps, always expecting to feel woodwork against the tips of her fingers, but she could not feel it. This must be a simply enormous wardrobe, thought Lucy, going still further in and pushing the soft folds of the coats aside to make room for her. Then she noticed that there was something crunching under her feet. I wonder, is that more mothballs? She thought, stooping down to feel it with her hand. But instead, But instead of feeling the hard, smooth wood of the floor of the wardrobe, she felt something soft and powdery and extremely cold. "This is very queer," she said, and went on a step or two further. Next moment she found that there was rubbing against her face and hands was no longer soft fur, but something hard and rough and even prickly. Why is it? Oh, sorry. Why? It is just like branches of trees. So the word why almost always is in a question, right? Why this? Why that? It's a question. Sometimes it can be used, rarely, as like an expression, an expressive word, it's like why? Oh, it's like oh, same thing like the word O-H. You probably have seen it before. People say oh. In Spanish, it might be ay, like ay caramba, as an example. So why is, in this case, is being used like that. And you can tell because there's no question mark at the end, right? So my mind got tricked when I was reading it. I almost read it like a question because it has the word why. But in this sentence, the word why is not being used as a question word. Note, though, that it's kind of rare to have it in this way. It almost always will be used as a question, particularly in modern English. But be aware that in literature, sometimes you'll find it this way. "Why, it is just like branches of trees," exclaimed Lucy. And then she saw that there was a light ahead of her, not a few inches away where the back of the wardrobe ought to have been, but a long way off. Something cold and soft was falling on her. A moment later, she found that she was standing in the middle of a wood at night time, with snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She looked back under her shoulder, and there, between the dark tree trunks, she could still see the open doorway of the wardrobe and even catch a glimpse of the empty room from which she had set out. She had, of course, left the door open, for she knew that it is a very silly thing to shut oneself into a wardrobe. It seemed to be still daylight there. "I can always get back if anything goes wrong," thought Lucy. She began to walk forward, crunch, crunch, over the snow and through the wood toward the other light. In about 10 minutes she reached it and found it was a lamp post. As she stood looking at it, wondering why there was a lamp post in the middle of a wood, and wondering what to do next, she heard a pitter-patter of feet coming toward her. And soon after that, a very strange person stepped out from among the trees into the light of the lamppost. He was only a little taller than Lucy herself, and he carried under his head an umbrella, white with snow. From the waist upward he was like a man, but his legs were shaped like a goat's. The hair on them was glossy black, and instead of feet he had goat's hoofs. That is the way C.S. Lewis spelt the word hoofs. Technically, the plural of hoof is hooves, Hooves. You have to apologize my ignorance, but it's possible that spelling it like this is an antiquated way of the plural for hoof. But just know that it's supposed to be hooves, Hooves. But more on that later. He also had a tail, but Lucy did not notice this at first because it was neatly caught up over the arm that held the umbrella so as to keep it from trailing in the snow. He had a red woolen muffler round his neck, and his skin was rather reddish too. He had a strange but pleasant face, with a short pointed beard and curly hair. And out of the hair there stuck 2 horns, one on each side of his forehead. One of his hands, as I have said, held the umbrella. Now, I do actually want to make a quick note here about the difference between present perfect and past perfect, because this is a good example. And I do recall that there was a few other uses of the present perfect, I think, earlier in this chapter, but regardless, let's focus in on this one. One of his hands, as I have said, right? So he took a step out of the past perfect for a moment because he's no longer describing the author, the narrator. He's no longer describing. He stopped describing the story, right? And now he's describing what he has done, right? As he was describing. So it's kind of tricky. You have to go between two different worlds. Remember that there's two worlds, kind of. There's a story the narrator is telling, and then there's the perspective of the narrator, his present, if that makes sense. So again, one of his hands, as I have said, held the umbrella. So he took a step out of the story and still in the past tense, right? Because this is the perfect present. The perfect present is a way of describing the past. Because he's saying, in the past, while I was describing the story, I said this, which is that one of his hands held the umbrella. I hope that helped clarify, because sometimes it's very good to see the present perfect in a story like this, because then it shows you, oh, this is why I would use the present perfect versus the past perfect, because you can see he uses the past perfect a lot when he's describing actions that happen in the story. Because the key difference is the present perfect happened at an ambiguous time, generally ambiguous time, up in the past, up unto the present, somewhere in between, right? But it's definitively, the past present is definitively in the past, right? So it happened some time ago, which is why you're going to say it when describing actions in a story, right? So let's move on, and you'll see this again as we continue. In the other arm, he carried several brown paper parcels. What with the parcels and the snow, it looked just as if he had been doing his Christmas shopping. He was a faun, and a faun is a mythical creature. I believe in Spanish it's a fauno. It's one of those words that it's hard to think of the top of your head, but I believe the Spanish translation is fauno. I could be incorrect. It's a mythical creature, so, no reason to really know what a faun is, because it doesn't exist in this world, but here you go. He was a faun. And when he saw Lucy, he gave such a start of He gave such a start of surprise that he dropped all of his parcels. "Goodness gracious me!" exclaimed the faun. And that's how C.S. Lewis concludes the chapter. Join us next week as we continue our series delving into the world of Narnia as we learn English and learn also about God and his love for us. Just remember, this is a Christian church, the Potter's House Christian Fellowship Church here in San Jose, California. I'm Peter Williams Garcia. I'm joined with our team, Marcos, who mostly handles our technical support. He may also fill in for teaching sometimes. So thank you for watching. Again, this is the Christian church. We love you because God loved us, and we want to share the mercy of Jesus Christ, his love, to you through any service that we can provide. English language learning is just one of them. So reach out to us if you have any questions whatsoever. And we will see you next week as we continue with our series in Narnia.